Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angie Gates. Well, wait, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. I'm Angie Gates. I'm the president and CEO of Events DC. I'm delighted to be here. Quite often you start with your titles, but I want to start by saying I'm a woman of faith. I am a woman of purpose, and I happen to have the title President and CEO. I'm also the daughter of Mary Gates, and I'm proud to be here with my 82 years young mom. So let me give her a round of applause. At Events DC, we are the official convention and sports authority, so I'm the sports commissioner. Washington, DC is the sports capital of the United States of America, so I am delighted to be standing here before you today. So I'm super excited to talk about our three lines of business, which is conventions and meetings, sports and entertainment, as well as an Emmy award-winning creative services department. I have a staff of about 400. I don't refer to them often as staff. I consider it our Events DC family. One of the questions is, how do you belong? It starts first with me. I have to build up my confidence and give my reassurance each and every day that I belong in whatever room I'm in and whatever room I'm in up next. And it starts with my mindset. I also make sure from a belonging standpoint, as I climb, I am lifting everyone around us. So we do have nonprofits that we provide grants to through our community grants program. We gave over $625,000 in grants, and in 2025, we're going to be giving over $5 million in grants to nonprofits. And we also, thank you. But also, in addition to the business, in order to run a business, you got to make sure that you're healthy mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So we just recently did a partnership with Care First, where we're investing in the health and wellness and the well-being of not only our colleagues that we work with, but putting that money back into the community. So I'll talk more a little bit later about Events DC, but all I can say is at the end of the day, you want to partner with Events DC, okay?
I will mention as I toss to Rashad Young that President Gates was at the Festival of the Diaspora last year in Rio. And she said something very similar, that if you want to partner, we want to partner with you. And for the folks that heard that, President Gates will be returning to Rio next weekend for the third official visit from Events DC, where we have formed partnerships across the ecosystem in Rio. So when she says she's ready to partner, she is ready to partner. Shout out to Gabriella here from Rio, has helped us make a lot of those work, but we are ready to partner, and thank you for being here. Next up, we have Rashad Young, the Senior Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer of the Howard University. HU?
You know.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Michael. I am Rashad Young, Senior Vice President, Chief Administrative Officer. In that role, I have the opportunity to oversee a broad portfolio that includes real estate, development and construction, facilities, IT, HR, public safety, government relations, corporate relations, and university strategy. For more than 150 years, Howard has granted degrees, over 100,000 degrees, in fact, in a myriad of professions, and had been the highest producers of the nation's black professionals in fields like medicine and health sciences, law, and engineering, and social work. When I think about this topic of inclusive innovation and belonging, I think about actually the announcement that we just celebrated yesterday, where Howard University was designated by the Carnegie Commission and the American Council of Education as an R1 research institution. Thank you. Which means our institution is a very high intensive research institution in the United States. There are few of these institutions around the United States. Howard is the only HBCU with that designation, and what it means is we spend more than $50 million in sponsored research, and we grant more than 70 doctoral degrees per year to students. And so when you think about the notion of inclusivity and belonging, this institution does that in a very meaningful way. And our research and our professors' contributions in all of the areas in which they perform research are making real differences in the lives of Black and brown people, given our historical mission and our focus. I also think about what HBCUs have meant to the nation since their founding when I think about inclusive innovation and belonging. HBCUs have a history and were founded on principles of access. And in the space and time that we're operating in today, with the political divisive rhetoric that is occurring in our country, there's no wonder that the enrollment surge that is occurring in higher ed is occurring with HBCUs. And I think that that is the case because people feel a sense of belonging in those institutions. They want to be in places where they are affirmed, protected, supported, loved, and encouraged. And in the experiences that we're having today, with all of the rhetoric and divisiveness in our national discourse, these institutions have been and remain a center of peace and space and support. And so by our very DNA, I think we live and show up each and every day and support those principles around inclusivity and belonging.
Thank you so much. I love that. Affirmed, supported, protected, loved, and encouraged. That's a great definition of belonging. I want to bring in President Burnett next. Dr. Colette Pierce Burnett has lived many lives and had many careers as an engineer, ran an art museum, everything in between. But I want to hold her up as President Emeritus of Houston-Tillotson University in Austin, Texas, a phenomenal institution that I had the opportunity to spend real time at thanks to President Burnett. And I'd like to know what this looks like to you, Madam President.
Thank you, Michael. I'm super excited to be here, honored. I was sharing with someone, you go to these kinds of events and people get on the elevator and no one talks to each other. But at this event, people say hello, they smile, they hug you. So it's just a wonderful, it's filling up my love tank for this kind of work. So like Michael said, I'm a retired university president. There is life after the presidency of a university. And I committed the second half of my career to historically Black colleges and universities. I feel very, very strongly that they have such a wonderful place in society. They're a pillar of our society. I did not attend an HBCU, but there's magic there. And education is the great equalizer. That is a mantra that I have in my own life. If I had stopped my own life at high school, I wouldn't be sitting on this panel and I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had. So just to give people that opportunity, and as my colleague said, historically Black colleges did that in an era where there were no other opportunities. They opened doors for them. And we shared this earlier in an earlier session, they built the middle class. So Dr. King, I've committed my life to building a beloved community, which Dr. King lifted. And what that looks like for different communities, it looks different for different communities. But with that platform of education being the great equalizer, even in my retirement, I spend a lot of time working with social equity, do a lot of board work, and a lot of passion around people belonging and feeling included. So I'm a child of the 60s, and I believe that we were lulled to sleep after the civil rights movement, where everybody relaxed because we were all equal, but we did not reach equity. And then with the brutal murder of George Floyd, we were shaken awake and we started talking about equity. And we started lauding things like people who are working in the equity space, valuing all voices, multi-generational. Every great movement has the wisdom of the more seasoned people and the energy and the bright, innovative ideas of the young, which makes a successful movement. Every movement has that. So all of those things we were lauding because we have finally come to a place as a country that we saw the value, economic drive. We saw the value in diversity, the value in equity, the value in inclusiveness. Now, those things that were lauded just a short time ago are unethical and illegal and banned. So I'm on this pathway to encourage leaders to be courageous, because we have to have courageous leadership. And even if we are not a leader, you have to support the courageous leader, because the fearless leader often puts themselves out front if they try to continue and push something that's equitable and right, and they can be pressed down and pushed back without the support of others leaning on that moral arc, which is bending towards justice. So we all have a form of activism. We're not all Angela Davises. We're not all activists in that way, but in your own spheres of influence, there are things that you can do to promote what's equitable and right. And I've committed my own life to that, and happy to be here on this panel today.
Thank you so much, President Burnett. I'm going to bring in Tamika Young next. I'm so excited as we look at what inclusive innovation looks like and we talk about multi-generational leadership. It's rare that we're truly covering the span of human life. Tamika is CEO of something called the National Association of Kidpreneurs. As the name would imply, it's an association for kid entrepreneurs. So I'd like to bring you in for your thoughts and reflections. Tamika.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for having me. And this is my second time attending as well. And I'm honored to be sharing the panel with these amazing people up here, including my husband, Rashad Young. But I do want to talk about the National Association for Kidpreneurs. I started the organization, it's been 6 years ago now. And it started out, my youngest son wanted to be a YouTuber. And he wanted to do it during a time when the kids were watching YouTube, watching each other play. And so he wanted to sit there for hours and hours and let people watch him play YouTube. And while I understood that there was a positive impact on being a YouTuber, I thought there was a future in that, I didn't particularly want him gaming all day. So with our history in homeschooling our kids, I just did some research, and then I started to find out about Michaela, who had lemonades and she was selling them in Whole Foods, and Mo's Bows, who had bow ties. And I'm like, these are kids that have businesses and I never heard about it. And as a parent, I wanted to know, like, why do I have to go looking for these things? And I wanted to provide a platform for young entrepreneurs or kids who wanted to start their own business. And so that's how it started. And due to demand, we started to do panels. We started doing business fairs, pitch contests, and kids are interested. And I think at that young age, our organization is for 18 and under, and people always ask about what is the youngest. And I've had as young as 4 or 5 years old participate, and we don't turn anyone away, because I feel like at their youngest, that's when their minds are the most impactful, innovative, like they think about all things. And for those who have children, your kids come to you with some ideas that you feel like are out of this world. But if we nurture them and if we try to help them, just kind of drive them in the right path, then they can come up with some really amazing things that will be fruitful for them in life. And I always tell the parents, if it's okay if they change their mind, because they are kids. And at 5 and 6, you may not have the same interests, but those skill sets that they're learning will live within them forever. I look at our organization as a space that gives a voice to those who are not usually heard because they are young, and especially in the space of entrepreneurship. Where they're not usually taken seriously. So our organization is international. We have partners all over the world, including on the continent and in the UK. And we do want to provide entrepreneurship as a healthy platform, a healthy space for them to live and thrive. But in doing that, they're learning lifetime skills. They learn how to take rejection. They learn budgeting. They learn how to speak to people. And so it's very important to be able to continue to nurture that at that young age. We talk about the inclusivity of it. And you look around, there are no kids in this room. they're not in these spaces because they're not invited, which I feel like is okay, but that's what our organization is for, is to provide that space for them to get this information in a way that they can understand it. And I also wanted to say, as a young entrepreneur, for those of us that are in here that are entrepreneurs or teachers or in whatever spaces that you're in, reaching out to kidpreneurs or young people and providing whatever mentorship, whatever space that you can to nurture them in is so beneficial. And for me, as a parent who has worked with my own children, I try to get them to become young entrepreneurs, and they dabble in it, but they do see how some of the benefits of it, I feel like. But as parents, and learning and knowing that I'm changing and helping to change the trajectory of their lives, of their families' lives. We've had multiple children who have their business has grown and their families quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs and work in the businesses with their kids. And that is amazing. That's very impactful in their communities, for their households. And so just as young entrepreneurs, you look at them and you might think or see certain things, but for me, I really see our future. I see, and it gives me a great feeling to be able to be a vehicle for them in this space.
I love that, Tamika. And so often we talk about what kind of future are we going to leave for our children, but very rarely do we talk about how can we co-create that future with our children. And I think you've really given voice to that. So look forward to coming back to you. Mr. Officer, Gary Officer, I met at this festival last year in Rio, and I'm so glad I did. The president and CEO of Workforce Inclusion, which he'll talk about a little bit, but I wanted to save Gary for last because he has this unique ability of tying together everything he's heard and talking about how people are really showing up in their best selves at every stage of their career. So Gary?
Well, thank you, Michael, and I must confess I am in awe of my colleagues on the podium tonight, but also I am reflective of the moment in time that defines my work. And we're in this sort of this awful counter-inclusive revolution, which serves to diminish the value of people and diminishes the value of the potential to be successful in an inclusive economy. So I have to reflect on that. And looking across the audience today, I always count the number of people in the audience who are 50 and over, because we often ignore that. Mm-hmm. Because in our culture, to age is to become more vulnerable. Let's start with that proposition. So I live in a world where we track data. So for most of last year, the labor force participation rate for Americans between 16 and 54 was roughly 67%. The labor force participation rate for Americans at 55 and over was 37%. The long-term unemployment rate for younger Americans was roughly 16%, and the long-term unemployment rate for Americans who are 55 and over was 26%. Data informs the narrative. So we can't talk about belonging absent the real experiences of people who are trying to make it in an economy and a society that devalues them as they age. And every measure I have reviewed, every study I've seen has suggested that an intergenerational team functions at a significantly higher skill level than those that leans towards simply younger people. And I'm reminded of so I've been watching a lot of overseas television news since last summer. And there was a Canadian interview with an athlete who was heading over to Paris for the Olympic Games. And she was the oldest member of the Canadian Olympic team. And they interviewed her. And they asked her, what do you bring to this team that makes you so unique? And she said, no, I bring resilience. I bring experience. I bring an ability to function as a team. But more importantly than that, I bring gratitude. And older workers, seasoned professionals, are bringing gratitude into the workforce. The ability to engage with good social skills on teams to ensure that the goals of the teams can be met. So I'm an advocate for, and I'm a proponent of, a fully integrated and intergenerational workforce where people are valued irrespective of age, race, gender, or sexual orientation.
Appreciate that so much, Gary. We, as I mentioned at Link, very much have embraced the intergenerational workforce, and we get asked a lot, what are some intentional ways that you can do this? And we talk a lot about the need for on-ramps into employment that are approachable. And so I'll give you one small example. Most companies, nonprofits, organizations have some version of an internship program, right? What does the word intern convey in your mind? It's someone in school who needs a little bit of work experience to get their first real job. So a simple shift, we don't have an internship program at Link, we have an associate program, and it's a paid professional associateship, and we put in our offers that go out to the world to apply to this, that this is for people at every level of their career. So we have high school associates, college-based associates, people who are looking for a job but are going to do a better job getting a job if they have a job, and people who have left the career either by choice or not, who can't find their way back in because they're too qualified for every job, even the ones they know they can do. So by just changing the language and making sure it was paid, et cetera, our associate program is now multi-generational, and our associate program is our hiring pipeline for full-time employment, which makes that multi-generational. So sometimes it's not as hard as we make it out to be, and other times it's very hard. So when there are word choices that help, I think that's something to be shared. Gary, you've studied this more extensively. That's an example from our environment. Are there other things you would point out to the group who are looking to do more multi-generational workforce and how to do that appropriately?
Yes, certainly. I think leadership plays a very important role. I've led organizations where I started noticing patterns in the hiring. I'm seeing young people hanging around the water cooler on a Monday, reminiscing about the weekend, the boss and the employee. The boss is 5 years older than her employee or his employee. People are hiring versions of themselves. And it's the responsibility of leadership to challenge or be observant about who is being hired, ask questions of HR about why are we seeing a non-diverse hiring pool, given the availability of talent in a marketplace filled with colleges. So leadership have a responsibility to be attentive, but there is this implicit bias towards those that we are comfortable with, and we see it so often in people hiring younger versions of themselves.
So I will reflect on that as well. That's a really powerful point. Dr. Burnett, I'd like to bring you in. When we were doing our prep for this session, you used a term that has stuck with me. And the term, if I'm getting it right, and correct me if I'm not, was anticipatory obedience. You said, I feel we're in a moment of anticipatory obedience. I just want to let that sit for a second. I'd love for you to expand on that.
So before I talk about anticipatory obedience, I want to say that when Michael and I talked about it, he reflected back to me, and he called it, I had to write it down, preemptive acquiescence. So now I'll give Michael credit in this room, but from now forward I'll be saying, like I always say. So anticipatory obedience is something that I read an article about what's happening in the U.S. at this point in time, is that entities, particularly companies, are anticipating something bad happening because they have DEI in the workplace. So they become obedient by dismantling it because they're anticipating something bad happening to them. So in effect, like for example, when people reacted to the Supreme Court ruling about admissions in higher education, people started to dismantle programs that were not anti the ruling, because they're anticipating something's happening. So that makes us live in an environment of fear. Recently, I was reading a Washington Post article where they had where you could. It was about what's happening with civil servants, and they were looking for people to give them information for them to be able to do what media does to give us the story. And at the bottom of the article, they had two ways that you can share your opinion. You could either email the writer, the journalist, or they had an anonymous way to give information. So we've gotten to a place in our society where people have great fear to speak their truth. And that's a problem, which is back to what I was saying about strong leadership, because strong leadership will counter that so that we can become fearless in continuing to move forward. And I just want to add something real quickly, 1 minute, to what you were talking about, young people moving with intergenerational. As a college president, I came to see something where my students would go on an internship. And so my student is Kiana, and they would get terrible feedback from their employer. But then when I started talking to people, I would realize that Karen would come to work not dressed appropriately or late. And someone would put their arm around Karen and say, Karen, this is how we operate in this environment. But when Kiana comes to work late, she's seen as a not good employee. So that's something we have to really focus on how we perceive the leadership and how young people in particular, or even all people in particular, are treated differently than another person because of an ism. So, and there are so many isms that I could say, but because of an ism.
Absolutely.
So avoid that anticipatory obedience, or I have to read it again, preemptive acquiescence.
I might throw out that I think there's an editorial in that, Madam President. Unburdened by being retired, you can say things that some can't. And I've reflected on that a lot. I stepped upstairs to join a board meeting for a nonprofit I'm on, and there was a screen full of people who felt horrible that they were removing buzzwords from their website. Horrible about it. We're not living our truth. But if we leave those up and our funding is cut, we can't live our actions either. And so I think we have to give some grace for folks who are being courageous by not being a target but doing the work. And then also, let's let people who have the ability to have that voice. Gary?
Michael, without prompting, let's talk a little bit about what you just said. The notion that we are forced into having to present to the world something that we don't believe in, right? My being approached by my attorneys to say, make sure that your website is America First friendly, right? My receiving phone calls in Miami on the way down from organizations that I'm closely affiliated to that have been told that they've been denied funding and the funding will be pulled henceforth because they identify a certain group. So if we're going to talk about an intergenerational workforce and belonging and inclusion, we cannot ignore the reality of what's happening in the space around us. And how do we, as leaders, respond to that as best we can?
Absolutely. Rashad, I'd actually like to bring you in on this, because when we were doing some of our preparation, you talked about the absolute necessity of an asset-based mentality in this moment. Let's talk about what we are doing, and that gets us sometimes out of that defensive posture. Can you reflect on that a bit?
Sure, and part of it is, I appreciate the difficulty that we all are, the difficult experiences and thoughts that we have about sort of changing our narrative and why we have to change our narrative. But the fact is that if you look behind the phrase, which is now this politically sort of bombed phrase of DEI, the point of it is that diversity adds value and is a significant value proposition to whatever space that you're operating in. It is a business necessity that translates to the interests of the business in terms of the ability to generate profit, the ability to be more innovative, the ability to be entrepreneurial, because of the unique backgrounds of folks that make up that space. And so, for me, if the lightning rod word is DEI because it has been politicized, let's not forget that we've been here where we are now before, and we always have took the position that Black and brown people add value to the spaces that they're in. The issue has been about access and ability to be at the table. And so from my perspective, as an administrator at Howard University, I'm happy to walk into the room and never say the word DEI. I'm happy to say that we produce graduates that are the best and the brightest in whatever field that they occupy, that can make a difference, create innovation, create entrepreneurship, change the world by virtue of the uniqueness that they are. I never have to say DEI. When I talk about and think about what our institution, for example, means to the communities that we occupy and serving as an anchor institution, I never have to say, hey, we're an HBCU that's 85% African American. What I say is we contribute $1 billion in economic impact to the DMV region. We employ 4,000 people. The spinoff
how much?
1 billion. 1 billion. The spinoff economic impact of those 4,000 employees, those 14,000 students, is significant. Our color is green in that respect, in terms of what we can build for our economy, what we mean for the region that we're in, what we contribute to the nation. And so I think as we operate in these spaces today, we operate from an asset-based perspective, talking about what it is that we do in a dollar and cents perspective, what we contribute to whether it's research or arts or engineering, and we let that speak for itself to get in the rooms that we need to be in and force that ability for access and opportunity.
That's so spot on.
Michael, I
And
just
coming
want
to
to add to that. You talk about a state of fear. So every day when I walk out of my house, there's a plaque right at my door that says faith over fear. I have a constant reminder daily to myself that I have to be in faith over fear. We talk about obligations, legal obligations, but I flip the word obligations and make that into an opportunity. And when you sit in a position such as we are as leaders, we take the opportunities that we have. If we're not seated at the table, I build the table to create the opportunity for others. So, for example, we talk about older adults. I don't use the word seniors, I say legends, because they've built a legacy. They're legends. We're following in the legends' footsteps. And we've talked about it from the perspective of a workforce environment. But what I realized at Events DC, we sponsor hospitality, tourism. We do all these big conventions. But what events was I doing for our legends, just across all 8 wards? So I did the Legends Ball. It was all about the legends. And it touched my heart to hear them come and say, you didn't forget about us. But it would be no me if it wasn't for you. And so I think that is the due diligence that we have to take the opportunities and be the voice for the voiceless, and take the opportunities as leaders to create that platform for everyone from an inclusive perspective.
I love that very much. One of my favorite and now go-to ways to handle someone saying, I don't stand for DE&I. I say, okay, let's take a breath and dig into this. Could you use each of the words and then tell me which one you don't agree with? It's really easy to be against an acronym or a buzzword. It's really hard to tell me to my face why diversity is bad, or why equity is bad, or why inclusion is bad. So sometimes it's just putting us in that space of, let's have the dialogue. President Gates, I want to stay with you for a moment. We've been a bit US-centric in our dialogue, understandably, given the moment that we're in. But you are here in an Events DC role to do international work, and I've heard you reflect on this in a really powerful way, that often sport and events are the places that communities come together, and often that's beyond neighborhood divisions, political divisions, and geographic bounds. Could you expand on that a little bit and why Events DC is taking that posture internationally?
So I often say music is the universal language. Sports is the universal language. When you talk about multi-generational, when your child is out there playing a game or on the court, it's the parents, it's the grandparents, it's the friends, it's the family. And also for us, we've done international events. It's interesting, we say soccer, football here, but whether it's called football or soccer, we all come together for the game, right? And I think that what happens not on the field or on the court is creating that dialogue of comfort. Typically, when you're in a comfortable environment, that leads to conversation. And quite often, what I tell people, through our sporting events and entertainment, and even when we're looking to hire someone, quite often you first are asking people, what's your credentials? What's your title? What's your credentials? But for us, it starts with character. And I always say, your character couple, that trumps your credentials, but then that leads to whatever compensation you may want in life. And so for us at Events DC, we utilize our sports and our entertainment to bring people together. But it's so important for all of us in this room to know we have a lot more things that are in common than different. Let's just, we live in a world. If I cut my hand, I'm going to bleed no different than anybody else in this room, whether we're in the States or internationally apart. And so for us, we make sure that we have a platform that we invite everyone to be seated at the table. And then you can get a good game of sports in the process.
I love that. When we were in Rio last year at Festival, we met with the culture secretary, Secretary Barros, and Angie and the secretary had this great discussion. And through the dialogue, we realized that the percussion, drum lines, bass lines of samba and DC go-go music were very similar, but that had never been really looked at before. And out of that came a cultural mission where DC brought a go-go band and muralist to Rio to paint a DC Rio mural as part of the G20 Summit of Nations. We did it in and with the community, and that community's invited us back to kick off their Carnival celebrations in front of the mural with a DC-based go-go band leading the samba school. So sometimes these small things become global in scale, and I love that.
And I think it's important too, we can't allow just being together for a couple of days in the weekend to be the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
As Michael just said, we've engaged with Brazil all year long. This is maybe my first time here in Colombia, but it's not going to be my last. And just be on the lookout. You're going to have a mural. We're going to have a mural here in Colombia as well, and be bringing a go-go band.
I'm going to get a couple last thoughts from the panel, and then I'm going to come to you, so please have a couple questions ready, and then we'll wrap up. Gary, I saw you wanted to jump in.
Yes, I've been on this bandwagon lately around this notion of civility. And I pause because we're not functioning in an environment that informs civility. So how do we get to belonging? How do we get to inclusiveness when we don't have the same respect and value in the persons across the room who might just be different than us? Mm-hmm. So I think I want to leave my closing thoughts is we have to get to that issue around civility. And once we can break that code, I think many things can occur on the back end of that.
I love that. And Tamika, I'm going to bring you in as we jump to questions. I have a 6-year-old. He's my everything. If you all follow me on social media, I post much more about him than everything else I do. But I learned so much from him. Civility is a big part of that. Can you just give us a thought on why young people have a seat at the table around anything entrepreneurship related in general? I've heard you talk about it's more than entrepreneurship. That's just the vehicle. But through that, we're learning life skills. We're learning civility. Can you just unpack that for a second?
Sure. And as I listened to what you guys were just speaking about, drawing those parallels and having those conversations, we took a group, our first international trip last year, a group of kidpreneurs to London to meet with our partners there. And beforehand, we've had Zoom calls where we've had the youth to be able to talk to each other about their businesses. A lot of them were authors or shared similar businesses, and so they were excited to be able to talk to each other. And it was just really interesting to watch how they interacted because they had heard different accents, and they're like, oh, you live in London and you're an author, I'm an author, and it was just a light that kind of went off to see that they had something in common with someone that wasn't in the same physical space as them, but a lot of them never had thought about even going to Europe. We've had some that have gone to, I think it was when did they go last year? Kenya. They went to Kenya last year. And just to be able to not only have that parallel with other entrepreneurs as they saw it, but be able to gain knowledge about those cultural experiences. And then in turn, you saw the respect because they are looking at and see someone who's doing what they do, and they understand that it's not necessarily easy for them to do. But building that helped them to build relationships. So again, this is a vehicle that we use, but there's so many other life lessons that they get from it that are things that they won't get in school. Most of them, they won't get in school. And a lot of parents don't really have the bandwidth or know-how to give it to them.
Appreciate that. Questions from the audience? Any thoughts, questions, observations anyone would like to share? In the back here, please, sir. Do we have a microphone? Jamal will run it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. My question actually is sparked by something Mr. Officer said. And by the way, I'm referring you to Mr. Officer because now I know how I remember you. I went to AU with Matt, and I remember seeing you a few times on campus. But you mentioned sort of the power of data in terms of driving narratives. And I'm curious to hear sort of all of you on this subject of how, as we live in this time where the power, the importance, the impact of DEI, belonging, these concepts that we all hold dear, are being challenged. How are we leveraging data to drive the right narratives around the impact of belonging in DEI, especially in a time when it seems as if the facts, the data are becoming less and less relevant to how people are informed about their beliefs?
Great question. Who'd like to start? President Burnett?
I don't have the full answer to that because that's just a brilliant, wonderful question that I've asked myself often. What I would like to say is that there are two types of data, qualitative data and quantitative data. And we often shy away from that qualitative data, especially with historically Black colleges, of the social impact. Just now we're getting to a place where we could put numbers to that because certain populations react to numbers. Corporations, et cetera, react to data and facts. So we have to continue, and I won't say learn, we have to continue to put facts with qualitative data and quantitative data to tell the story, to tell the narrative of the impact that we've had and continue to have on society in the greater picture.
That's great. Gary?
So Americans who are 50 and over contribute over $7.2 trillion towards our GDP. They support 1.3 million jobs. If older Americans were an economy by themselves, they'll be the 5th largest economy in the world, right? Age discrimination, conversely, costs our economy about $850 billion a year. If we didn't have age discrimination, we'd add another 20% to GDP. So every study I've seen and reviewed suggests that if we are a tolerant, inclusive, and opportunity-driven workforce, right, the results will speak for themselves.
Other questions? Sir, right here. Microphone is coming.
While he's waiting on his microphone, if I can
Please,
just comment on
please,
that too.
Tamika.
I think that we're looking at it from a different lens as well. I think we as, not only as leaders, but we're all consumers as well. And we don't realize our power in that. And so one individually has to realize their power before we can all come together to do it. So realizing that and getting that message out there is very important as well.
Sir?
Not a question, Michael. You invited observation.
Absolutely.
And Angie talked about the convening power of sports. The Super Bowl just completed in the United States, and one of the 2 winningest coaches in the history of football, Andy Reid of the Kansas City Chiefs, was asked for a very, very, very long career, what is the #1 lesson he's learned. And he said, never put people in a box, because if you put them in a box, they can't surprise you.
That's powerful. And can someone give President Gates a microphone? And I don't know if she'll say this, but I'll say it. She was at the Super Bowl as a New Orleans native. So.
You may see me a little bit later with my Super Bowl hat on. So I'm originally from New Orleans, living in Washington, D.C. But to go into the Super Bowl and be in that moment with the Fly Eagles Fly and the Kansas City Chiefs, like DEI was not a topic of discussion for 50,000 people. It was about the camaraderie of coming together in the game of sports and having a respect. Now, of course, people had their own teams, but the topic of that discussion never came up. It's interesting how sports and entertainment, how that just starts to bring people together. And I witnessed that at the Super Bowl, how people were hugging each other, giving each other, a hard time when you wasn't for the team you wanted. But at the end of the day, what it showed me is that there was still hope, still an appreciation for people.
And did anyone else have anything? Otherwise, I'm going to stay on this hope. We've got 4 minutes and 46 seconds left. And before we go to that, we're going to take a question here. Go for it.
Yeah, I have a question. Pardon my English. Have you ever feel as a leader that you don't belong to a place, and how do you solve it?
Such a great question. Who'd like to start on that? Tamika?
Yes, I feel that way very often because of the youth that I serve, the group of young people that I serve are kidpreneurs, and that is not, it's very new, like within the last 5 to 10 years. And so I, especially initially, found myself having to explain and sell and get people to understand the power behind it, why it's important, why people should support it. And then it started to take, I think in the last 2 to 3 years, it started to really take off, and people are starting to really support and see and talk about youth entrepreneurship a lot. But I definitely have. And in that space, the hope in the youth, knowing that I'm providing a platform for them and seeing what they're doing with it is really what keeps me going.
Would anyone else like to take that?
Yeah.
Please, Rashad.
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. I recall sort of my own career trajectory. So I'm in higher ed now, but my career has been in local government prior to being at Howard, and I was a city manager of a number of cities. And I remember, I was 27 when I got my first city manager job, and the city manager is running the day-to-day operations of a city, and I was 27 when I was city manager in Dayton, Ohio. And the senior leadership team was twice my age, or perhaps more. And showing up in that space where you can feel the view of self-doubt and questioning about your ability to be at the table was not easy to do, or not easy to persist through. And through those early parts of my career, when I was the youngest in the room, in those spaces, I constantly had to tell myself, why not me? Yeah. Why not me? I am prepared. I have to tell myself I'm prepared. I'm here for a reason. I can contribute. I have value. And to sort of push down that imposter syndrome before I even knew what that word meant was sort of a constant coaching with myself, and then people around me to lift me up, like my wife to say, no, you should walk through this door and sit at that table and hold your head up high. And so it is really just taking that moment to kind of really applaud yourself, congratulate yourself, lift yourself up, and say, yes, you deserve to be in the room that you're in. And even today, rooms that I walk in where I think while there might be less of that still occurs for a variety of reasons, I say, no, I deserve to be here.
We have got 1 minute and 28 seconds left, so I'm going to need 15 seconds from each of you. It's a heavy time, big topics. What gives you hope? I want to send this crowd out with something hopeful. What gives you hope? Gary, we'll end with you, President Gates.
we are resilient. We've been through worse, and we've always gotten through eventually. So that gives me hope.
Tamika?
I think I've already said it, but what gives me hope is knowing that I am depended on by so many young entrepreneurs and also their families, and that I can see and I know what their futures can be, and because of the experiences that I've been able to provide.
I love it. Dr. Burnett?
So what gives me hope is young people. I'm super inspired by young people. I'm through these times, I'm excited to see their genius being unleashed and the power of young people. And I think we should support them. I read something that said they stand on the shoulders of their ancestors and they can see farther from there. So I really, really, really believe in the power of hope. And really quickly, I want to give this young lady some advice that works for me. I was often the only black, the only female in the room. And I had to build what I call the kitchen cabinet. People who believed in me more than me, because they sustain you as you move through that organization. And you give me hope.
That's great.
I'm just gonna say ditto to Dr. Burnett. It's really the young people on my campus at my institution. Those students are inspiring, and they put you in a sense of awe. And so I have a lot of confidence in our ability to persevere because of the inspiration they provide to me.
Excellent. Last words, Dr. Gates.
At Events DC, we have the Events DC Academy, where we invest in the next person in hospitality, tourism. Everybody in this room gives me hope, but I also put my money where my mouth is. So we're going to be offering a $15,000 scholarship for the next entrepreneur up. That's hope, because I know you're going to do better than I could have ever delivered. So you give me hope, and you're up next.
Thank you all so much. We're all supported by great people, and I want to thank Mama, Babette, Paula, Yamna, and Jamal for all the work they did to get us ready for today. Thank you.